In this lesson, we're going to explore several easy ways to track paint and clone strokes in Fusion using the tracker node. So let's add in a tracker node and let's bring that up into the viewer. If we take a look at the clip, you can see that the camera kind of moves in and out, moves around a little bit. So we're going to need more than one point to track. Let's just go down here. So we're going to need another tracker. So I'm going to add a second tracker. And I just want to note that we are starting on frame 70, and I'll bring that up a little bit later. So let's just set up our trackers. So I'm going to set one up here, and we'll do one right here. And let's just track forward and backwards. So one of the easiest ways to do this is to grab a paint node and we'll drop it right into our tracker. And we can set up our merge operation right within the tracker. But before we get to that, let's take a look at the paint. If I bring the paint up in the viewer, it's totally blank. And that's because we haven't set the resolution. We don't have anything for a background. Now we could bring the media into it, and then we can start to paint. But if we start to paint here, we're going to be painting on the original image. We're going to merge it back on top of itself, which is really not what we want. What we want is the paint by itself. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to grab a background node. I'll drop it into the paint, and in that background, go over to the alpha right here and bring it to 0 so that it's totally transparent. So now when we paint, it's going to be on a transparent background, and then we'll merge it over the original using the tracker node. Okay, so now we have this set up. So all we have to do is in the tracker, we just need to set the operations, and then we're ready to paint. So come over to operations, and what are we going to do? We want to match move our shot, and we want our foreground, which is the green input, over our background. So we can do the merge operation right here. And now we're ready to go. So now we can go to the paint. Let's go to stroke so that the paint stroke will last every frame. Click on that. Let's do a nice blue. Now it doesn't matter what frame we're on. Okay, so we can go to frame whatever, and then I'm gonna make a circle here. Now you can see our paint is lining up perfectly, and I can stop anywhere I want and paint. Everything will track in as long as it lines up with the area that we track. Now remember, we tracked these two post-its. So everything on this board is going to line up. If I try to paint over here, right, that's not lining up. It's will float, okay, because of where we tracked. So just FYI, anywhere we're painting on this board is going to match perfectly. Let me undo that last one. So this is a basic setup, but a lot of times you're going to want to do some other operations to the paint before you merge it and do your composite. So that's easy enough. We can just take all of this, move it up a little bit. Let's unhook it, and we take our tracker and then merge it here. And then let's look up through here. Our paint is gone, and that's because just like the paint node, the tracker node needs to have that input in the background. Okay, it just needs the resolution. So I could come connect it to the media in, because that's what was tracked, right? And inside the tracker, if we look at the tracker, you can see it's already doing the merge here. So what's happening here is we're merging the paint over our original image, and then we're taking this whole image and then merging it back on top of the original again. But we don't want that. We want just the paint, right? So we want foreground only. So now right here is foreground only, and then we're merging it here. And that gives us the option to add things like grain or blur before we do the composite. Maybe you don't want this tracker to be set up with the media in, because really after the track is already done, all it needs is the resolution, just like the paint. So another option is just take this background that we're using for the paint and drop it in here. And you can see nothing has changed. Everything is perfect. And so this is the setup I would use if you're going to use a basic tracker to set up your paint work. And now you can do whatever you want. Now you can paint from anywhere, anything you need to do, you can paint. You know, I can paint here. You know, everything is going to line up with the whiteboard. So that's a very easy basic setup for your paint inside of Fusion. But what if you were going to do clones? Now, this can be a little bit different. Not much. It's really the same setup. But in the paint node, we have to be careful about a few things. So let me delete that paint, and let's add in a new one. I'm going to bring this in and make sure that it goes into the green input, the foreground. And let's talk about cloning with the paint tool using the tracker. We take a look at the paint tool. Let's go to stroke and let's go to clone. Right now, the way this is set up, the cloning is going to happen from this background. We're going to be cloning from this background onto our original clip, but that background has 0 pixels in it, which means we're not going to be painting anything. So we need to give the clone a source. Okay. And that's what this is right here, source tool. So we can grab our original clip, bring it right in and drop it here. And now we're going to be able to use our original clip. But remember, what we're doing here is we're bringing in the natural motion of this clip that we tracked into the paint. And then we're coming to this tracker and we're adding that motion again on top of it. So as far as cloning from this moving clip, this is not the proper way to do it, but a still source is going to be fine. So let's click on still source. And what's happening right now is that we're going to use a still frame from this clip. And then we're going to use that to clone, and then we're going to add the motion back on top. If we take a look at the tracker, our reference time is the start frame. Okay, so frame 0, that's where we are. And in the paint, our source time is 0. So if I turn on overlay, everything should line up perfectly. And I click on overlay, you can see it perfectly aligns on this frame. Now, if I want to change the reference time, that can be a little bit of a problem with the tracker that comes within Fusion. Because if we go into the tracker, you remember we have, if we click on this drop down, we only have select time, which is where we started tracking, start and end. We can't really move it around. But on a side note, I would highly suggest getting the free Reactor plugin set that you can download, and I'll put a link below. And that way you can use Tracker Plus, and then you can change your reference time to whatever you want. Now, it's not such a big deal when you're dealing with still frames, but when you start dealing with stabilized plates, you're going to want to have the option to be able to change the reference time, depending on what you need to do. Just to quickly show you, if you download the Reactor plugins, you can look up Tracker Plus, add that in, just so you can see what it does in the Tracker Plus. All the tools are the same, but if we come over to operation, you can see right here, we have an option to set the current time as reference frame. Okay, just like you can with the planar tracker. And you can even export the transform out. So you can use one tracker, and then you can set all kinds of different reference times depending on the kind of paint work you need to do. Real time saver, highly suggest downloading the Reactor plugins and turning on Tracker Plus. Anyway, let's go back to what we have inside of Fusion. So I'm going to go back to the paint and let's take a look at this. So on this frame, it's not going to be a problem. Let's turn off the overlay. And all I have to do is come over here and say, I want this sticky note to be right here. I just click and start painting. And you can see, there we go. I got a red sticky note now down here. And because it's a still frame, we add the motion on and you can see it lines up great with our shot. Okay. So that's one way to do it. If you turn on the overlay and you change the source time, you can actually use this control right here to move it around. And say I wanted a yellow sticky note right beside the red one, you can move this around and zoom in here. And then as you start to paint, you'll see it starts to darken. Okay. And so that way we can use the overlay right here and then boom. So you can even use a different frame and then you can turn on overlay and then you can use the offset controls here or right here to move it around to place where you want the image to source from. And then you can paint right there. Okay. So that's a quick little lesson on using the still, but there's a problem with this. If we look closely, because we're using a still frame, it doesn't have that grain. So if you look around this image, you got that little subtle motion from the camera where these two stills are frozen. Not a big deal on such a small object like this, but if you want your composites to be nicer, you're going to want to look into doing something like using a stabilized plate. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to turn off still source. Let's bring it back, the time offset to 0, reset the offset. What we want is a stabilized version of this plate, and we can do that pretty easy. So let's grab our tracker, copy it, paste it, drag this in there, and then let's look through this tracker in the viewer. Let's go over to operations, and over here we had just the foreground only, but if we want to stabilize the plate, we will do background only, and that's going to stabilize the plate based on the reference time. So if I go to frame 0, you can see it's perfectly stabilized on frame 0. Again, this is why the Tracker Plus would be really helpful, because if you go through the shot and say you want it stabilized at frame 90 after you've done the tracking, there's no option in here to change the reference time to anything other than the select time, which would be frame 70, start or end frame. And then you could do the average, but that's not going to be really helpful. So you can be more precise with the Tracker Plus. Okay. But anyway, it's okay for this. So on frame 0, we are perfectly stabilized, and it shouldn't make too much of a difference for this one. Let's go to our paint, and instead of that source tool being that, let's grab this and drop it in. And so now we have a stabilized version that we're going to use as a source. And if I turn on the overlay, you can see it perfectly aligns with that first frame. As a matter of fact, it should align pretty well throughout the shot. And we can check that by doing some clone work from here. So now you remember, now we're using a stabilized version, adding in the animation. So we should be able to paint right from here. So say I want this green one. Okay, and just option, click the bottom there, and you can see that's, oops, I got a little bit of that black, that's okay. Okay, and now we have a clone from here using the stabilized version, and you can see, boom, there we go. And now we have a green sticky note, and the noise is actually in that one. You can see that natural noise, and it looks a lot nicer than these still frame ones. Okay, so anyway, that is a quick setup on how you can use the tracker node for doing your paint and clone strokes within inside of Fusion. Highly suggest looking into Reactor's free plugins, specifically the Tracker Plus when it comes to this, and also looking into planar tracking, at least for the cloning. For paint, it's not as big of a deal, but for cloning, definitely the planar tracker. And I'll put some links down below to a bunch of different videos that you can go check out if you want to know more. I think that's about it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.